Sarin kites nearby, make it into 3 fuel rods and stick them in the center spots of the pre-placed engine layout. Throw in a nitrogen canister and crank up or down the stator load until it's consistently spinning at 600 RPM. If that's what you need, then you're good to go, because nothing about the nuclear engine is that basic. Now, if you actually want to know how it works and how to abuse it, stick around. Ever looked at that glowing green skeleton in medbay the doctors aren't comfortable going near and went, man, I'm jealous? Well, good news, weirdo. We're talking about the nuclear generator, the source of power on Clarion and Nadir. In short, nuclear fission, the process of an atom splitting into 2 or more atoms, creates heat. This heat heats some gas that spins a turbine, and this turbine generates power. It's that simple. To delve a little deeper into the overall process, gas will enter the nuclear engine via gas channel rods. Nuclear rods, through fission, will heat. Heat exchangers will bring that heat to gas channel rods to heat the gas. Gas will exit the loop and go into the turbine. The heated gas will spin the turbine and generate power. The gas, now cooler from interacting with the turbine, will loop to step 1. Repeat until meltdown. So, the nuclear engine. Trypophobia be damned, this machine with a shit ton of blinky lights and computers is where heat will be generated to spin the turbine. It does this by utilizing radioactive materials undergoing fission, and the heat it radiates to heat a gas. Now, you'll see it has a 7x7 grid for which to insert rods in any orientation. I'll go over the dials and crap later, but for now, let's talk about what actually goes on in a nuclear generator in some detail. A fuel rod, as mentioned before, decays over time. As it decays, it shoots out particles, specifically 125 neutrons. Fuel rods making neutrons without any further input is referred to as spontaneous decay. These neutrons travel any direction out from a fuel rod in the engine vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. Neutrons from fuel rods shoot out at 3 different speeds: slow, medium, or fast. They'll move in a straight line until they hit a rod, and interact based on the rod's density and the neutron cross-section, which we'll talk about later. If the rod is radioactive and the neutron is at a slow speed, it'll roll a chance to cause a nuclear reaction and make the rod create more neutrons like decay. There's 2 different types of fission that I'll go into later, but both perform the same action of shooting out 1 to 5 neutrons in different directions. If the rod does not cause a nuclear reaction, the hardness of the rod will be used to determine if a neutron is reflected. If a neutron is reflected off a rod, it will either go straight backwards or plus or minus 45 degrees backwards. If none of these happen, a neutron will simply be slowed down by a speed and continue forward, or be deleted if at slow speed. There's an exception for control rods, which will delete neutrons at any speed. A quick material science note, since this isn't a Mad Sci guide, but is incredibly relevant anyways. All rods are made of different materials usually found from mining or cargo. I'll list the most relevant ores you'll want for each rod in their section, but if you need to check the statistics of any ore, you can use a material analyzer found in the mass refinery. You'll have to buy any ores you need from a fabricator of any type, or maybe just ask mining to give it to you since credits don't really matter. But luckily, you don't need to refine them, as you can just slap them in the nuclear nanofab. There are 4 types of rods: fuel rods, which make neutrons; control rods, which halt and reflect neutrons; heat exchanger rods, which transfer heat to other rods; and gas channel rods that let the passing gas interact with the engine. Each of these rods has 2 unique multipliers that determine how they interact with neutrons and each other. Neutron cross-section is a multiplier that determines the percentage chance a rod has to interact with a passing neutron. If this chance succeeds, the neutron interaction steps I mentioned before will be checked and occur. Otherwise, this neutron will simply pass through. This value is multiplied with density and determines the percentage chance a neutron will interact. The other value is thermal cross-section, which is a multiplier that determines how much heat it'll transfer to adjacent rods. These factors help to keep rods fulfilling their designated purpose and help you to get neutrons to go where you want them to go. Fuel rods are the source of neutrons in your reactor. These will be made of a radioactive material and release neutrons, slowly decaying over time. The more radioactive a material you use, the higher chance of fission. Now, these fuel rods actually have two types of radioactivity and neutron radioactivity. With standard radioactive ores, on being struck with a slow neutron, they will heat by 25 Celsius and shoot out 1 to 5 neutrons at slow, medium, or high. Neutron radioactivity is a stronger form of radiation. With neutron radioactivity, the rod will heat by 50 degrees Celsius and will never shoot out slow neutrons. To do a recap, there's spontaneous decay for neutron radioactivity, and neutron-stimulated reactions for both neutron radioactivity and radioactivity. Fuel rods, unfortunately, are not infinite. The longer they undergo fission, the more they fizzle out. The percentage chance for fission goes down every time fission occurs, eventually leaving the rod noticeably less effective than before. Worry not, this isn't the end of your PTL days just because mining's dying to salvagers. Centrifuges located near the engine can take fuel rods and use the leftover radioactivity to generate plutonium-239. If the fuel rod recycle doesn't have enough leftover radiation to create actual plutonium, it'll make waste instead. Don't worry, this radioactive waste can be added to centrifuges to contribute to making full bars. Control rods are what keep neutrons in line and reduce the risk of irradiating the entire station. Control rods, if you want to keep them effective, will need a high density to maximize the chance of them catching any neutrons they interact with. A neutron will either bounce back any neutron that hits it or delete it. It will never let any neutron that interacts with it pass through. If you want to reduce how much the control rods block neutrons, you have the option of choosing how inserted they are into the engine. At 100% insertion, they work as normal. But the more you retract them from the engine, the more you lower the chance of the interaction, all the way to 0. If you want to maximize how much it bounces as opposed to just deletes, you'll also need to crank up the hardness. The higher the hardness means higher the chance of a bounce. Control rods are going to be very important. They're the way you ensure the engine doesn't overflow with neutrons and make a big fuck-off hole where the engine used to be. Heat exchanger rods are what spread heat from fuel rods to gas channels. As mentioned before, the higher the thermal conductivity, and to a lesser extent electrical, the better it is at this job. While all components will equalize and share their heat with nearby components, the heat exchanger does this the fastest and is what will be most reliable in heating gas rods. They also have the benefit of spreading heat across the engine so as to mitigate the melting of rods, which we'll get into later. Without these, your engine won't be much more than a fancy storage rack for metal tubes. Gas channel rods are points where gas will enter and exit the nuclear reactor and take in the heat made by fuel rods. The gas channel rod will take its heat and transfer it to the gas inside. Each gas channel provides 100 liters of gas storage to the nuclear engine and thus into the entire gas loop from engine to turbine. The more gas channels in your engine, the more gas you can push through and thus the more you can crank up the turbine. At the bottom of the 7x7 grid layout, you can see some other soil statistics that can come in handy to see how much danger you're in. You can see the overall temperature of the reactor, the amount of radiation coming off of it, and the insertion level of the control rods. I'll explain their relevance later. Now, the turbine. The turbine, luckily, is relatively much more simple. As mentioned before, this takes hot air and uses it to make the turbine go spin. The more gas inside and the hotter the gas inside, the more power can be generated. It's not just a matter of making it spin as fast as you can, however. The turbine operates at maximum efficiency whilst at 600 RPM. Any slower, and it won't generate much power. Above 700 RPM, it goes into overspeed. Overspeed causes the turbine to suffer damage until eventually being unable to contain the rotation and exploding. If you see it getting damaged, crank up the stator load and weld any damage pronto. If it really comes down to it, the parts can be made, and even upgraded, at the same place you make reactor rods. Harder materials make it take less damage from overspeeding. Denser materials make it more resistant to changes in RPM, which is useful for keeping it stable. It has two variables that help control it. The flow rate is how much gas it's intaking and holding inside of it. It caps out at 1,000 liters, and the basic nuclear engine already has 1,000 liters of gas storage, so just put it at 1,000 liters. There's no reason not to. The stator load is a value that is used to determine how much energy is required to cause revolution in the turbine. In layman's terms, the bigger this number, the slower the turbine spins. Finding the balance on this is vital to get that optimal 600 RPM. And not always easy, as the temperature is often fluctuating with time and engine maintenance. Be sure to check on this regularly while you're setting up or changing the engine. Up until now, I've been pretty quiet about how dangerous this thing can be in the wrong hands. Well, here's your big reminder that this thing is still indeed a nuclear reactor. A nuclear reactor that can and will explode if you let it. First, hot rods. Rods can be safely handled with gloves up to 400 Celsius. They can be handled without gloves under 80 Celsius, but then where the hell are your gloves? Don't get slipped and looted next time by the clown, you idiot. Above 400 Celsius, however, grabbing any fuel rod will ignite you, so be ready to handle that situation however you need to. Heat isn't just an inconvenience for the flammable face of the engineer, however. If at any point a rod heats above 1700 Celsius, it will melt. This melting causes it to lose its previous function and instead gain a neutron cross of 5 and a thermal cross of 1. This basically turns it into a hyper-effective conductor, and fuel rod if it's radioactive, leading to overheating across the board if not handled quickly. If the overall reactor's temperature reaches 2000 Celsius, the nuclear engine will, well, soon it won't be anymore, along with a country-mile radius around it. If the gas in the turbine ever reaches 3000 Kelvin, it'll immediately expel all of that gas into the air in an emergency purge. Granted, this temperature is literally impossible to reach with a nuclear engine, but I don't know, maybe you just want to do a burn chamber instead. Then why are you even here, you jerk? Radiation, of course, duh, it's a damn nuclear reactor. The nuclear engine and its contents will constantly be emitting hefty radiation. Don't even think of handling fuel rods or blinking in the direction of the engine without radiation gear. Now, even then, the engine isn't foolproof. Neutrons that make it to the edge of the engine will simply fly out as little blue balls and irradiate the first thing they hit. If this is a wall or two, then it's mostly harmless, but unchecked can make a trip to the bar turn into a superhero origin story. An overabundance of neutrons in the engine will also overload the engine and risk a meltdown as well. So keep those control rods in mind before you throw in your 17th plutonium rod. So naturally, all this talk about a gas, but we haven't actually chosen which one we're going to use yet. Keep in mind, if you happen to choose the wrong one or you want to swap it out, you have the option of using the purge valve connected to the pipes. If need be, the pipes can be reinforced, though not as often as necessary as something with like a TEG. Oxygen is probably the worst pick since it has no unique properties and the lowest heat capacity. If you want a basic gas, just go for nitrogen. Now, if you're asking what special properties means, let's get on to CO2. When a neutron passes a gas channel with CO2, there's a chance that it'll consume 1 mole of CO2, delete the neutron, and heat up the gas by 5 Kelvin, meaning that gas channel rods turn into discount control rods. How you want to use this is up to you. Plasma is a more volatile option. When it gets hit with a neutron, it produces neutrons and decays into a new type of gas called fallout. That decays into a random gas as well when hit by a neutron. So, in other words, your gas channels are now turbo fuel rods. Much, much more risky. It should be noted that as neutrons can escape the reactor, they can have these interactions outside of the engine as well. For once, filling a room with CO2 isn't the dumbest idea ever, as any neutrons that shoot out of the engine have a much higher chance of being stopped in their tracks. Or you can surround it in plasma because you want to die. And that's just about everything I could give you. You might notice that I left out how to actually lay out the rods and the most optimal setups for that. You might be wondering if I'm not saying it because I don't feel like learning it myself. Which, ow, but fair. At the same time, a part of the fun of it is still figuring that out for yourself. I've given you all the tools, and frankly, I think you'll do just fine. Thank you for watching. I apologize for this being too boring. And hopefully you go out there and that days since nuclear meltdown doesn't end up as a 0. But if it did, it'd be really funny.